When we're on the cusp of a new year, it can sometimes be that time when we take stock of our life so far and look to where we want to head in the future. But what about if we took time to look back on each day, 365 days a year, looking at our behaviours, our attitudes, our thoughts and emotions? How might it change not only us, but our relationship with God? Welcome to Life Issues. I'm Vicky Gibbens, and later we'll be joined by the author of The Art of Journaling, Becoming a More Reflective Person. The Right Reverend Dr. Matthew Porter, Bishop of Bolton, will be our guest. But we start our conversation with Dr. Chris Williams, Emeritus Professor of Psychosocial Psychiatry at the University of Glasgow and Director of Living Life to the Full. Chris, looking back can often take us to a place of nostalgia. We can become sentimental. It can even at times for some of us rehearse pain of the past as well. So self-reflection just initially, is it a bit indulgent, a bit self-centered? What's your take on it?
I think looking back on the day, the week, the year can be really helpful from time to time. I think one of the things to consider, though, is the extent to which we do it. So if you look at the psychological research, there's a very good evidence base that if at the end of each day we sit down before going to bed and reflect back on that day and think about identifying 2 or 3 things that have been fun that day, given a sense of pleasure, or 2 or 3 things where we've felt there's something achieved, something that's been ticked off a list, or something that's been done that we felt a sense of satisfaction, or thinking back on a meeting with somebody that we liked, somebody who's challenged us or been interested, but something that's lifted us. Writing those things down, taking a short time to reflect, contemplate, if you can use that word, can actually lift people's moods. So in the field of positive psychology, doing that task has been associated in research papers with feeling better. And I think the idea of within Christianity of looking back can be really helpful. They can pick out things that we can be thankful for. They can pick out challenges that maybe they've been answered to prayer or where things have resolved. I guess, though, the question is, what are we focusing on and what can we do with it? And that's the extent that we wouldn't want looking back to so dominate our minds that we can't begin to look forward either or learn things.
It's interesting. A classic parenting technique is to ask questions quite often to help your child think about their emotions and behaviours. Why do you think maybe when we move into adulthood, some of us stop doing and asking those kind of questions of ourselves?
I think that's a really nice question. You're absolutely right. I think parents almost have to teach children to be able to label emotions, to realise what's going on. There's this idea that when you're a baby, everything's a booming, looming, confusing, and that slowly we work out the meaning of things, what things are, what our emotions are. And I think for us as adults, first of all, sometimes people haven't always done that very well, that task of being able to define their emotions is one of the things. It's not something that everyone's automatically good at. I think the other thing, though, is sometimes we just don't have time, that we're in a very fast-forward society. You know, that life seems as though it's fast-forward all the time. It's the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. There's very rarely times in many people's lives, unless they choose to create such a time, to stop, slow down, and reflect. And that reflecting being about learning something helpful about ourselves, about other people, about God, about what's happened. And I think that ability to slow down and get off the conveyor belt and building that into a day can be really helpful. I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that thinking back of 3 nice things each day, or achievements or connections. One of my friends and colleagues each day takes a photograph, every single day, a photograph of something that's been special to her. It may be a beautiful sunrise or sunset. It might be perhaps a beach. It might be flowers in a garden. It might be a person they've met that they've really enjoyed. Just something that captures something positive about the day, and they keep it in a separate album on their phone, and they use it whenever they're feeling down or challenged, as well as for good times. And I think it's very helpful because one of the histories of the Bible is human beings, we forget things, or we forget good things. And that's not just thousands of years ago. I think it's also very human today too.
What happens when we move into a position where we're reflecting, we're finding the positives, and then something comes into our thought process and we start to get stuck in some kind of worry loop or negatively ruminate? How do we stop those occasions from arising?
I really like that you described it as a worry loop, because one of the challenges of worry is lots of people think they're doing the right thing, which is thinking things through, mulling things over. And it can feel for many people as they worry that, in fact, they're problem solving. The trouble is with worry, it doesn't actually resolve problems. It just is worry. It goes round and round and round and round. It's often the same thoughts being turned over a bit like chewing the cud. It goes round and round. And the trouble is it's exhausting. It doesn't lead to problem solving. Problem solving leads to problem solving. But worry just ends up causing anxiety, so emotional changes. It's very worrying physically. So if we're constantly stressed and thinking about worrying things, what's going to happen, things will go wrong, what will people say, what have I done or whatever, those sort of thoughts fire off our body's fight or flight threat response. The idea of adrenaline, it doesn't mean we have to have a full-on adrenaline flow, but it can just mean that we're slightly breathing faster, slightly our heart's faster, our muscles are slightly more tense than usual. That can be exhausting. It's a bit like walking fast all day or running a marathon all day. It can be very mentally and physically exhausting. So I would very much urge people to think in terms of moving away from worry to instead of moving to problem solving, tackling practical problems when they're needed, but also thinking about how can we manage our minds. So I think the answer there would be less reflection or more helpful ways of looking at things that are more encouraging and perhaps kinder as well to ourselves.
When you have a passage like in Romans 12, verse 2, which talks about the transforming and the renewal of our minds, for you in the line of work that you do, how do you think through that verse?
I think transforming is something I'd link in with growth and development. I sometimes think of life, and if I'm leading a workshop, there's an opening slide that's in many of the workshops that I and colleagues do, and it's a drawing that's been made of mountains on hills, and on one side there's sunshine and blue sky, on the other side there's clouds and rain. And I think life is like that. One of the errors, if you put it like that sometimes I think as Christians we can fall into, is the idea that Christianity is about just the blue skies and the sunshine. I actually think life in general is about good things happening sometimes. Sometimes it feels like it's a sunny, warm day. So we're doing things that we enjoy. We're feeling fulfilled. We're doing things that give a sense of achievement. We're walking with other people that we like. But also sometimes we can wander off the path, or we can get bogged down, or it's muddy or rainy and it's cold and wet. And sometimes we walk by ourselves and it's lonely and hard. And sometimes we can get bogged down or slip up and it's very difficult and hard. It's hard to walk in the mud, it's hard to walk on a beach sometimes when it's wet. It's those sort of things that could seem really like a hard slog. And sometimes we walk with people who actually aren't that good for us as well and could pull us down or critically. And sometimes we can do that very well ourselves. We don't need other people for that. So I feel life as being both those aspects. And this idea of transforming is how do we have a path through life that we're learning all the way? And maybe actually, you might be other ways that ministers or others would trade this as well about being transformed by the Holy Spirit within you and those things. But I think it's constantly about changing and sometimes making mistakes, sometimes slipping up, but it's also about getting up and down and moving forward. And if you've made a mistake or slipped up, there's a bit I really liked in the Puritan years ago, comic book I read, it's decades ago, but it was right at the end of this comic book, and there was two people on the boat, probably her and father or someone like that, and talking about sin, about so once you confess sin, don't go fishing, and they had fishing rods and you reel it up again and keep bringing it back when actually God's forgotten it. So I think part of that transformation is also not getting too stuck in the past. But we made mistakes, we could move on in life and in faith from that as well.
And for us as Christians, as we reflect, I guess it's remembering that God is ever present, whether we are choosing to reflect through photos, like you mentioned your colleague, whether that is through the form of journaling. As it says in the Psalms, it says to cast your burden on the Lord and he shall sustain you. And even during those periods of reflection, being aware of God's presence with us.
One of the things, just as someone who's worked in mental health for lots of years, part and parcel of depression is it damages relationship. So people, when they're depressed, it's so hard to get out and meet people. It's so hard to get out of bed sometimes if it's really severe. It's so hard to open the door. It's so hard to get into work. It's so hard, even if you make it into work or make it into church or anything, to say hello to people. There's those inner voices for people of, nobody will be interested, nobody wants to talk to you, etc. And part and parcel of depression is people can feel distanced by the people, and for Christians, distance from God. And that really matters a lot for people where an important part of their faith is that connection with God. You see it, for example, in new mums with postnatal depression. They know intellectually they've been so excited about pregnancy, so excited about their baby being born, but the postnatal depression robs that joy, it removes that joy. So they might intellectually know, this is my child, I should love them, but that sense of love is damaged and taken away. And I think it's the same with that sense of closeness to God. When there's depression, when there's stronger feelings of depression build, there's a sense of distance, and that's very hard to live with if you've been used to that. So things like singing songs or hymns or listening to faith music or whatever, it's not something I do very often myself, but the idea of music as a lift, if that was helpful for someone, that joy would be taken away. And for other people, it might be songs, whatever it is, singing along to things. Instead of that sense of connection, it feels flat or empty.
So you were talking there about the scenario of being someone living with depression. We hear a lot about cognitive behavioural therapies. Reflection, what does that look like in a professional form for the line of work that you do?
One of the key challenges in mental health work is how to help people when they're struggling to live their normal lives. And there's tons in the media at the moment about lots of people off with long-term disability, physical and mental. The three biggest disabilities at the moment are depression and anxiety and issues like chronic back pain, chronic pain, and chronic physical health conditions, sort of musculoskeletal difficulties. And all of these get caught up in how people see themselves, how they see and judge themselves. So, for example, people off work for a year, if you're off work for a year, or even less than that, it's a big crisis of confidence going back into an office. There's this belief that everyone else has moved on and we're left behind. And I think how I would say cognitive behavior therapy is it's a simple way of describing that is cognitive means thinking. So focused on the ways we see and judge ourselves, our situations in the future. This often when people are feeling depressed or anxious, they are very hard on themselves, very unkind to themselves, very unforgiving. So your view of yourself is very negative, failed, bad, damaged. Beliefs about what's going on at the moment. So everything seems the dark, negative, slant to it. So we're very aware of the things we haven't done, the things that have messed up. And even though there's things we have achieved, nice conversations or nice things that have occurred or achievements we've done, those get overlooked when we look back on the road. So we're pulling out the failures or the things we've not done. And then it's the same, not just looking back, it's looking forward as well. That the future is assumes that it will go from bad to worse. So our cognitions, our thinking changes. And of course, anyone thinking that way, if we think negatively in a distressed way, it causes us to feel anxious, it causes us to feel down. If our mind's on these things all the time, it makes us really down and really anxious. And the final way to see it is cognitions, our thoughts, our beliefs, can affect our behavior, our relationships, what we do or don't do. So if we're scared of things, we'll start to avoid things a lot. And that makes life safer. The trouble is, if we do it, it makes it feel safer and our lives get smaller. And we end up doing less and less, and we get in a cycle where the less we do, the worse we feel, and then the worse we feel, the worse we do. So the cycle spirals down. But also it can remove us from doing things that would have been fun. So if you think about the COVID pandemic, for example, in a way, it gave us all a glimpse of what it's like to have depression, because we couldn't do lots of things that were pleasurable. we couldn't go to the cinema, we couldn't go to the theatre, we couldn't go for just to be part of those people at parties and things. And if we strip away, we do a pleasurectomy. If you strip slowly away those things that give us a sense of pleasure or colour in life, our life gets greyer and empty. And I think the pandemic's a bit of an idea of what that's like when our life is emptying other people and many of those pleasures. So cognitive behavioural therapy is about helping people recognise what patterns have befallen on you, what have we stopped doing, what are we avoiding, and how can we slowly build these things back into life for those that need help and uplift people.
I wonder what your take is, given the years of experience and how long you've been in this field. Obviously, we've seen a huge impact, as you've described, because of the pandemic. We know of the severe waiting lists for people experiencing or needing treatment when it comes to mental health as well. We hear a lot around building resilience levels, exploring conversations of well-being with young people as well today. But you alluded to earlier this idea of the pace of which we now live at, what we fill our lives with. Do you think, obviously, every situation is unique and different, but part of what we have lost through the generations is also that time and space for deep thinking?
I think that idea of time and space for deep thinking is a really, again, interesting thing when you reflect on how our society is. You mentioned young people. There's one way of describing the challenges facing young people is an epidemic of distress. And I'm sure it's partly because of the pandemic. It's been really tough times. As to people, wearing masks at school stops you really interacting with people. All sorts of things that have been really, really difficult. But one other thing is that has affected people, possibly, I don't know if this is exaggerating or not, but I think social media is a really harsh taskmaster for people. And it has harsh impacts. And think something which is supposed to be educational, supposed to be interesting, supposed to be fun, for many people seems to become an oppressive pressure, where people have to, must, should, or got to log in, see how many likes you've got, see how many dislikes you are. That idea of the filter of our minds picking out bad. Somebody might have loads of people liking something and one thumbs down or whatever, and that's focused on. And it's very distressing. I think social media for many young people is overly emphasized as a way of judging worth. I think we need to get back to be able to look and see ourselves in different ways other than just in things like social media. So I'm not personally a massive fan of social media because of that. I'm sure in the right balance, it could be really helpful. I think it's where things get unbalanced. And I think that really is a challenge. It's where people feel enslaved by something and it becomes both not helpful, but possibly seriously unhelpful and distressing. So I would think the idea of reflecting on how we see and judge ourselves and having those times of deep reflection. I think people should be more thinking about how they relate to the people they can see. And I'm not downplaying the importance of distant relationships and people game with or whatever. I know that's absolutely real. I quite enjoy gaming myself, but things like this is real, but also I think it's important not to be doing that all the time. Maybe I'm just too old saying this, but I do think the pressures people feel under and the beating yourself up if you don't get quite the right response is not likely to lead people to well happen.
And the way that it has now evolved and become so ingrained as part of our stories, a life without social media, that doesn't seem a possibility when you look to the future and all that's evolving and developing, especially with AI as well.
Do you mind if I challenge that a little? Because I'm not sure I fully believe that, because from time to time in newspapers, reporters will try and recruit their younger members of their family to give up social media for a time. A week, 2 weeks, and you see what happens. And there's always intense complaints, this would be terrible. But when people substitute other things, like going swimming or riding a bike or meeting out with friends or playing games, it often goes far better than young people or the parents think it could possibly do. So I'm not completely bought in to this, but I do agree these are very useful tools. Gaming's fantastic. Talking to people on the other side of the world's fantastic. I just think it's good to do both things directly with people, activities we do ourselves, as well as things that are more distant. But it's the self-judgment, I think, is the key thing. It's the feeling of failure. And I don't believe that people fail if a particular post goes wrong.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because I guess the social media culture feeds into that. When we are self-reflecting, we're also comparing, and that leads and feeds into judgment. And as Christians, the Bible is quite clear when it comes to thinking about judgment.
I don't think that works a lot at church as well, because I think sometimes in church, there's a particular way I feel I should, or have felt I should dress or act. And there's certain things we're supposed to do. When I was younger, I went to a range of different churches. And do we have to be happy to go to church? Do we have to smile? Do we have to... I don't actually go to a church where you have to be victorious or whatever. But I think sometimes it can be a sense you've got to go to church and be a very successful Christian. And again, I don't believe that's true. I don't think God believes that's true. I think when people look inside themselves, they know it's not true. But there could be a sense of how we come over to others. So I think honesty in churches is really important, or at least a bit more honesty in churches, because I think churches are about people who struggle and fail, and are sometimes on the left side of that diagram I described with the rain and the clouds are getting stuck, as much as the blue sky and the sunshine. It's both. This life is both, and I think people are both those things. Our experiences in life, and if you look at the Bible, it's so many examples of struggle, prison, famine, things going wrong, that are challenging. So it's not, I think the Christian faith isn't about just happiness.
Chris, I'm aware we have only dipped our toe into the water when it comes to this theme of reflecting, but what would be your thought for someone who has yet to start this journey of exploring what reflection and self-reflection means to them?
I think if somebody was wanting to take some of these principles and put the ideas of reflection and helpful reflection into life, I'd suggest trying to, at the end of each day, just take a small length of time, just 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, and look back on the day and think, are there 3 things that gave me either a sense of pleasure, a smile? Are there any achievements that I've done, something to pat myself on the back over, or any connections with people that you like that you can join? Somebody's giving you a smile again when you feel connected or encouraged you, and to write those things down and spend a little time reflecting on it. And guessing most of the people who listen to UCB will be Christians, you could build that into your prayers as part of thankfulness for the day. So I think it doesn't mean you have to be enslaved and do it every day. Just give it a go. Try it a few days in the week. If it's helpful, maybe build on it a little more. And if you'd like to keep building on it with lots of advice and books and resources on the idea of meditation and mindfulness within a Christian context.
Dr. Chris Williams, thank you very much for sharing this space with us.
Thank you very much.
The Right Reverend Dr. Matthew Porter is the Bishop of Bolton, author of The Art of Journaling, Becoming a More Reflective Person, and the book is published by Authentic Media. The idea of becoming a more reflective person, some may think, is linked to a certain personality type or someone who is very considered, rather intelligent. For someone today who doesn't feel contemplation and introspection is for them, how would you challenge them to reconsider?
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. It's a great question. I think we're all called to reflect, because reflection is just about learning and ongoing learning. And hopefully that's a good thing. Well, actually, whether we're a follower of Jesus or not, we all want to be growing as people, learning about life and the world and the universe. And so I think there's an ongoing journey of learning, we hope, for everybody. But I think if you're a follower of Jesus, you particularly want to learn and grow and mature. That's part of discipleship. It's part of growing in faith and love and impact. So really being reflective is just about thinking deeply, in God's presence and saying, Lord, what can I learn? How can I change? How can I become more Christ-like through this? Hopefully that's good for everybody, whatever your personality type.
So when did it start for you, the idea of getting into journaling? Because I know that you have quite a stash of books to your experiences now.
Yeah, well, probably about 30 years ago. I can't remember if I called it a journal back then, but I remember I started to take notes and record a few things, which is slightly different to a diary. You know, a diary is a factual account of what's happened, and keeping a diary is good and can be really helpful to go back sometimes remember certain things. But a journal is more as I said, reflecting on things. So if I was even to journal as a diary this conversation, I might say, well, I was on UCB with Vicky the other day, but reflecting on it is when I was talking to Vicky on UCB about journaling, this happened and this made me think about this and well, I wonder about that. And so it helps me dig into it and learn from it and grow through it. And I've probably been doing that about 30 years. So I've got about 30 years worth of journals. I've probably journaled more regularly for the last 20 years. So the first 10 years are a bit more sporadic. But I started to get into it about 20 years ago. And I can't remember actually what spurred me to kind of go deeper into journal or do it more often. It might have been a friend of mine who was doing it, who's been doing it longer than me. I can't remember, but I've been doing it for a while. And it's probably been one of the most helpful things I've done in life.
And it takes a certain discipline and routine, doesn't it? I know the morning is the time of day that you like to write. And as you've just said, it isn't so much about logging what you had for breakfast and the finer details of your every movement. But the morning might not be for everybody.
Sure, of course, yeah. And it's a bit like prayer, you know, you can do it anytime, any place, anywhere. And you don't have to journal every day. The friend I was referring to earlier does journal every day as part of his devotions every day. He tags on a few minutes, 10, 15 minutes every day, and he will journal. And he's very personal about it. I know this friend of mine, and he's written in his will that at the end of his life, all his journals should be burnt, which is great because they're so personal. They're just between him and God. But of course, you can do that any time. I journal probably 1, 2, 3 times a week at the moment. There may be periods when I might journal every day if I've got a bit more time and space, or perhaps I'm going through something really important or even something really difficult. I need to journal more regularly. So I don't think there's you don't have to do it all the time. And I do find it useful for me, like my friend, to take it on the end of my devotional time in the morning. But sometimes I don't, or sometimes I can see from my diary I might have 20 minutes before tea time or something, and I get a nice cup of tea and sit down and there might be something particularly I want to dig into. I might want to, reflect on something that's happened in my life that I just want to record. Perhaps someone's shared a prophetic word with me that's stirred my heart and I want to write it down and reflect on it. Or maybe I've read something in the scriptures that's just stirred me. Or maybe I prayed a really bold prayer that I don't want to forget I prayed. Again, I might journal about those things. I journal about all sorts of things, really.
I mean, the book has a framework, the 5 R's: record, reflect, rejoice, remember, repeat. I did notice that there wasn't a ranting R that you had a chapter on. How do you avoid it becoming a place of ranting when perhaps you're going through a more challenging period of life?
Yeah. Well, I think it's okay to do that sometimes. I think the main thing is to be honest. It's really I think Christian journaling is supposed to be a prayerful thing, and so we're supposed to be honest with God in our prayers. So similarly, we should be honest in our journaling. So if we're going through a difficult season, we mustn't hide that. The whole point is to talk about that. Occasionally, I found myself being a bit introspective, a bit too introspective, or I feel like I'm almost here we go again. And occasionally, I've journaled about that. I journaled about why is this thing still happening, or why am I feeling like this? So I think the main thing is to be honest, and also I think there's 2 ways around you can journal. You can take something's happening in your life and journal about it. And do that prayerfully, and maybe let scripture speak into it. That could be helpful. Or you can do it the other way around. You can start with scripture, and then out of that, let it then speak into your life and stuff that's going on. Either way around, I think scripture is really important in journaling. And that's something that is unique, I think, about Christian journaling. We do it prayerfully, but we're also asking God to speak. Now, of course, he speaks in all sorts of ways, but scripture is one way he does it. So I'm often asking, Lord, is there a scripture you want to speak into my life, into this situation? And often there is. And that can be helpful to begin to write that down and reflect on that as well.
And when we look to God's word, there are some verses that talk about self-reflection, like in Proverbs, as water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart. Even interestingly, if you look at Jesus's, well, a bit of a reprimand, if you like, in Matthew's gospel, when he says about taking the log out of your own eye and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. There is something that quite fascinating as you even look at the scriptures and think about self-reflection as well.
I agree. And of course, you don't have to journal to do that. You can just do that, as you're going for a walk or as you're sitting in church or as you're lying in your bed. But there's something about writing it down, putting it on paper that you can come back to that's I think really important. And that's why I say in the book, there's all sorts of ways you can journal. Some people like to draw things. People like to stick things in there. Some people like to audio journal, on their phone or something like that. Those can be really good, and I do those at times. But there's something about writing it down that is important, I think. We use a different part of our brain when we write something down compared to when we speak it out. It does something for us. And like I say, you can keep coming back to it if it's on paper. I can go back to my journals. I can go to my shelf and pull a journal off for 10 years ago and reread it. But, that's much harder to do if you've recorded it on audio file or something like that. There's something about writing it down that's very helpful and therapeutic, and as an offering to God. I think it's Psalm 5 that talks about in the mornings I come and I lay my requests before you. I love that picture. It's almost like laying it out on the table. In a sense, when we write it down, we're doing that. We're writing it down, not just for us, but also in God's presence. We're laying it before God and saying, here's the stuff I'm going through, God. What do you think? Help me, guide me. Help me to be more, your person, your ambassador, your disciple. And that's very healthy, I think.
I know in the book you talk a bit about the idea of writing it down being a form of therapy. And you said before about how you've really got into it probably in the last couple of decades, particularly. Do you think that also just shows where God is taking you in your journey within church leadership and maybe why this has been such a useful tool for you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, yeah, yes, maybe. Although I think I wouldn't want to just say it's just for church leaders. I think journaling's for anybody. But I would encourage church leaders particularly to journal for their own sake and to model that to other people. But yes, as a church leader, it's been really helpful for me as I just don't, because my journey is not just about me, it's about my family and it's about my church family that I've been going, through life with. So, and that's a great honor. That's one of the lovely things about being a church leader. You go through things with people and you go through difficult things with people and I've recorded some of those things, and that's why most of those things will stay private. Of course they will, but some of them are my prayers for people. Some of them are things for the church when we've really stepped out in faith or God's done something amazing that I really can't explain. I don't want to forget it. I never want to forget it. So I want to write it down and give thanks, but also remember it, because we do forget some things, actually. I say in the book that when I reread my journals, I often have to repent because sometimes I think, oh, not much is going on in my life at the moment, or that's last year. It's not been that good, really. It's been all right. And then I reread my journals and I think, oh, I forgot about that, and I forgot about that, and I forgot about that. So there's a whole remembering thing as well, which is really helpful. And of course, we're commanded in Scripture to remember what the Lord has done. And I think we're not actually that good at it in Western culture. The other cultures are often more oral cultures, or who would sit around a campfire and tell stories. They're much better at remembering. We're not so good at it. So journaling is another way to help us remember and fulfill that command to remember what God's done and to give thanks.
Can we reflect a bit more about that idea then of looking back and how it takes us forward as well, thinking particularly in light of your own father, which is something you talk about in the book. Richard Porter wrote his life story before he passed away in 2005 from a short illness with cancer. And how do you find that balance of not living in the past, but how it can take you forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my dad was very formative for me. He was, key person in my life. And I miss him, but I'm grateful that he wrote his life story. And he was helped to do that by his journals and by his diaries. That was really important for him. And he was able to look back and reflect on his life, and the fact that he'd written it down is such a gift to me. I tell those stories sometimes. I sometimes read from his autobiography, and I sometimes tell them to my children. And also just names and dates and places. Again, I forget these things. So those things can be really helpful. It kind of roots us in history, and I think reminds us too that we stand in a long tradition of people. So often we very much live in the present, but we're shaped by all this past. So I just think it's just a great tool to journal, and I wish I could actually do it more, if I'm honest. But I do it as much as I can in this season. And it may be, perhaps when I'm older and retire, I become even more reflective and journal even more. We'll see.
And you touched on this idea of what should remain, private between you and God and what gets shared publicly. A few weeks ago, I was at a National Trust property, and they had these journals dating back to the 1700s, and they were called the Great Tour Journals. And people wrote to record their travels and then come back and share them publicly on their return. And in the book, you share a few snippets of your own personal journey, but you do talk about the power of retelling stories, and particularly I wonder if you can share with us again what happened in relation to your hip stories.
Oh, yes, thank you. Well, I think there is power in rereading and retelling, both for us, and sometimes in telling those stories to other people as well. One advantage of writing them down is we can go back and remember them accurately, or as accurately as we did when we wrote them down. Because if something happened 5-10 years ago, we forget, or sometimes we can even change it. So for accuracy's for the purpose of accuracy, it can be helpful. So we don't exaggerate it or under exaggerate it. Actually, under emphasize what happened. So I think it's good to be able to go back. But I think it is good to tell some of these stories again. And I mentioned in the book, for instance, this thing that happened to me when I was speaking to New Wine Conference a few years ago. And I was telling a story about a woman I prayed for whose hip got healed, who didn't think her hip had been healed because she didn't feel anything. And I just asked her to check it out. Reluctantly, she got up out of her chair and she started walking around, and she was gobsmacked that she was healed. She was so excited about this. But at first she thought she wasn't. The purpose of telling the story at the conference was just to say you don't have to feel anything to get healed. That was the purpose of telling the story. But at the end of that session, someone came up to me and they said, I heard your story about the hip. And just to let you know that when I came in here, I had a sore hip. And as you told that story, I felt this tingling in my hip, and the Spirit of God seemed to be coming upon me, and I think I've been healed. And I said, that's wonderful. And no one had prayed for it. It was just in the retelling of the story, something had happened in it. I thought, oh, this is interesting. Anyway, I did pray for her and bless her briefly. I saw her a few days later in the conference. She said, oh, I'm still healed, by the way. My hip's fine, which is great. And then a year or two later, I told the story again, and something very similar happened. And actually, I told it again, and something similar has happened. So sometimes the retelling of the story itself can be very powerful. Sometimes as we tell a story of something that's happened in the past, God seems to release faith for it to happen again. Now, if it wasn't for my journals, I wouldn't be able to tell some of those stories. So they're really important. I mean, just yesterday, someone was telling me about how they lost their sense of taste and smell. And so as I thought about that, I thought of a story of someone I prayed for about 3 or 4 years ago who got their taste of smell and taste back. So I said, well, I will pray for you, but let me tell you this story first. And I told them that story, and then I prayed for them. Now they're not yet healed, I don't think, but we'll wait and see. Because I'm not promising them healing, but sometimes it's the telling of the story stirs faith, hope, expectation in us, and God's Spirit uses it to do something remarkable. Those stories, so we get them right, it helps to write them down. And my journals are a great tool for that.
Mm. And this idea, which I've never really come across before, that journals can be part of God's mission. They're not just something to sit on a shelf. As you say, you go back to yours. You've got a bit of a tradition of reading it around New Year, I know.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But this idea that, as you describe in the book, a missional tool for releasing kingdom of God transformation. Explain that a bit more to us.
Well, I think it's easy to think that journals are just therapy. They are therapeutic. I really believe that, and they really help us. But basically, it's just for me and my little life and how I can kind of become a bit more fulfilled and feel closer to God. That's actually a bit narrow. I think God wants to transform us and change us for the sake of the world. To impact our family and our neighbors and our community and our workplace. And if journaling really is a kingdom of God tool, it's got to be for that. So then the question is, how can it be used for that? And so I've just found it helps change me. It gives me resources to share. It lifts my faith. So the point is it's not just for me. It's meant to be for others. And as I've read about journaling and heard from others who journal, they say the same thing. In fact, a little bit. Let me just quote a little bit from the book, if I may. I was just looking it up just before we came online. Here's something from the missiologist Michael Frost. He writes a book about how we can be more missional people, more have an outward focus. And he says this: keeping a journal and recording all the ways you are mirroring God's work in the world will start to shape the way you think about yourself. You'll eventually come to self-identify as a missionary, as a sent one. You'll be looking at your life and how you conduct yourself differently. And the journaling process will reinforce this in creative and useful ways. I could not agree more. Journaling is not just for me, it's to help me be a missionary disciple.
And as you shared earlier, there are so many different ways that you can go about journaling. But the point is to start writing and see where God takes you.
Yeah. There's good tools out there to help us. You can go to a bookshop and you can buy a journal already with some questions you can fill in. Those things can be good. But actually, journaling can be very simple. Just find a piece of paper or get a nice notebook and literally write the date on the top and start to write. And I would just choose one thing you want to journal about, one thing that's perhaps on your heart, on your mind. It could be two, but and just write till you've finished. And I sometimes find as I write, I reflect on something that's going on, and then I say, God, what do you think about this? Or before I know it, it's become a prayer. I thought I was just writing about what I'm going through, but it becomes a prayerful process. And that's something unique about Christian journaling. I think we're welcoming the presence of God, and we're inviting him to transform not just our reflections, but our very lives. And anyone can do it. It's not that difficult. The hardest bit for some is picking up your pen and write. I quote Martin Luther in the book, if you want to change the world, pick up your pen and write. I love that. Journaling is not an end in itself. It's there to help us. It's there to help us become a more reflective person, and so that we can become God's missionary disciples even more effectively in the world. So don't just journal for the sake of journaling. Journal to become reflective, and be reflective so we can mirror Christ and show his love in the world.
The book is called The Art of Journaling, Becoming a More Reflective Person, and it's published by Authentic Media. The Right Reverend Dr. Matthew Porter, Bishop of Bolton, thank you very much for sharing this time with us.
Thanks, Vicky.
As Bishop Matthew shared, journaling can take us in all sorts of directions. What stirs our heart, the unusual, the funny, answered prayer. And it isn't only about gratitude. Being authentic about the difficult means it's okay, as he said, not to be thankful for every circumstance, but you can be thankful in every circumstance. My thanks to today's Life Issues guests, our producer Rachel Gillis, and of course, thank you for your company. Do make sure you subscribe to the series.